All right, hey. We are in a new series. Last week we finished up our series Fantasy on love, sex, dating, relationships, all the good stuff. And we're starting a new 4-week series called Pardon the Interruption. Right? And it's this idea that for you and I, church and Christianity is really easy to exist on like Sundays and Wednesdays and when we're singing worship songs and things like that. But the gospel and what Jesus came to do actually interrupts our everyday living. And so everything that we thought was normal, the gospel kind of enters into the middle of it and says, hey, there's actually a different way to do this thing or to act this way or to live amongst the people that you're with. And so we look at these stories that Jesus tells, or sometimes the people that Jesus runs into, where he kind of begins to explain a different way of living. A lot of times he'll begin to describe what is called the kingdom of God, and what that should look like and how we live within that. And he's helping people understand what that means. So we're going to spend 4 weeks looking at that, 2 weeks, and then spring break, we'll be with our Colorado team, and then 2 weeks when we get back. And looking at those things, and tonight we're kind of looking at, man, how do we handle relationships? And not just of the romantic kind, we spent 3 weeks on that, but really just how we relate to other people and how we interact within the midst of that. Okay, and so in my sophomore year at Texas A&M, I was living with 3 other guys, 2 of which that I went to high school with, and 1 that I met during my time at A&M. And at the end of our freshman year, we found a house, and so we decided that we're all going to live together. We each had our own room. It was a total, guy's house. It was gross from bottom to top. Once I started dating Haley, whenever she was like, hey, let's study together, let's do this. We never studied at my house because it was disgusting. It was and it smelled bad all the time because there's no science in the world that can cure whatever it is that college guys smell like. And when they live together, it's impossible. It's the worst. And we lived together, and all of us kind of had this idea of what it would look like for us to live together, right? And so some of us, like me, I was really just kind of hey, I just want 3 dudes that I can moderately tolerate to split the rent with, in a place that occasionally, if we wanted people to come over and hang out, that it would be a pretty cool place to hang out. And then there were some other guys that were in their mind, they were oh, these 3 dudes that I'm going to live with, we're going to be best friends, we're going to be family, we're going to do everything together, we're going to hold hands, skip together, organize our class schedule around each other, we're going to name each other's kids after each other. And I just had these big, grand ideas. And then on the even opposite end of the spectrum of that was one of our roommates who was I'm just going to exist in my room, and I'm going to come out to drink water every now and then, and I'm going to go right back into my room, and you're never going to know that I'm even here. But as long as I pay the bills, we're good, right? And so we had all these ideas, and it kind of created a really weird culture in our house. But not only did we have these weird ideas, we were all very different people. None of us were majoring in the same thing. There was very little that any of us had in common. And even physically, we were super different, okay? So I'm really skinny, which means that I get cold the moment it drops below 60. I throw a hoodie on from October to April, because I just get cold so easily. And in the winter, I'll wear full sweats in bed because I don't like being cold because it'll make me sick. And I definitely didn't like being cold in college because A&M's campus is 1,000,000 miles long, and so you're always kind of in the cold. So you don't want to get sick and just be miserable walking around all the time. Well, and the opposite end of that is one of my good friends and my roommate, and he was literally twice my size in every way. And so he never gets cold. He's only hot. It gets above freezing, and he starts sweating. He's wearing T-shirts and shorts, walking to class. We're very different. And so during the winter, I would come home, and I would we had 2 different living rooms, and I would walk in, and I'd look in our little man cave room. It had the bigger TV and the more couches, because in college, in your house, your parents care. About how the couches look and that everything looks like a magazine. In college, you just start building platforms and stacking couches. So it's and all of a sudden we live in a movie theater. I don't know. And so I walk in and I look over, and my buddy Scott is literally just sprawled out, shirtless. And this is January. And sweating, and the windows are open, and the thermostat is on AC on 68, and it's 40 degrees outside. And I'm dude, what is wrong with you? It is the Arctic in here. And he's I'm so hot, I can't do it. I'm it is January, bro. And I would just rip into him because he would leave the windows open, and then at night when it would get below freezing, he would forget to shut the windows, and so the house would just be unbearable. Just a nightmare. And so we would fight and fight and fight, and all my roommates are bigger than me, so no, man, it's totally cool. I'm we're about to pay $500 on our electric bill in January. This is insanity. And so we would fight, and it was their joke that I couldn't handle the cold and all this stuff. And one morning, I'm laying in bed, And I'm like in sweats, and I'm like cold in bed, and I can't figure it out. Because I have like a layered blankets. I've got like this nice fleece one. I'm just like, I cannot get warm. And it's a Saturday morning, so it's like 10 a.m. I've slept in. I've got nowhere to be. Like, I'm not doing anything. I might stay there till 2 p.m. if I can really make it work and not get hungry too soon. And I can hear like my roommates playing video games. And I'm like, man, this big truck drives by the front of our house. And when it goes by, I have this weird feeling like that truck is in bed with me. Like, I'm like, that was so loud. Like, why can I? Like, my room was right by the walls of the front of the house, but I was like, I don't normally hear cars like going by like that well. Like, why do I hear it so well? I'm like laying there, and I lay on my left side, so I'm facing inside. And I roll over, and I just kind of reach my hand out, and there's no window there, and it's just the screen. And I realize that my window is open, and that my window's been open for weeks. And I immediately, like, kick down my door, storm into the living room, and there Scott is in all his glory, laying out. And I go, "What did you do?" And he goes, "What?" And I said, "My window!" And all of my roommates just die laughing. And he looks at me and he goes, "We opened that window a month ago. I've been sleeping in bed, freezing my butt off for a month, and I just like tear into them using the vast depths of my vocabulary that I can reach to. Just bam, 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 and your mama, and your mama, and your mama, and your mama." And I make my way through, and I go back into my room, and I slam my door. I shut my window to go back to bed, and I can just hear grown men in the other room like, and after a while, like, I was so mad. I was like, worst roommates, worst friends, may they die horrible, slow deaths. It is what has come on them. I was like, I am done. And then I lived a life at the time that I was dating Haley and all this different stuff, so I was like, I don't even have to be here. I'm going to come here to sleep, and that's it. I'm going to wake up and go to class. I'm not coming back, and I hate everybody else who's in here, and yo mama, and yo mama, and yo mama. I was done. And I realized, like, months had gone by, and so me and Scott, we just never spoke, like, ever, the rest of the semester. You know how hard it is to live with someone for 6 months where you pay bills together and not talk to each other? Turns out, not that difficult. I just go on, we just don't talk. We stop hanging out. We stop doing things together. And then, like, eventually, then it's become this awkward thing that we stopped because of this huge fight. And then we were like, yeah, like, I'm kind of past the window thing, but now I got to stand my ground, right? Like, I'm here. I live in this fight. I've made a room. There's a couch and curtains. Like, this is my fight now. And so we just keep going on and on and on. And that was 7 years ago. And it is just now, you can ask Haley, it is just now that we are starting to get past the awkwardness of that fight where we can kind of hang out together. Like, he texted us when Emery was born and was like, "Hey, I want to come see your kid." And I was like, ... really? Question mark. Like, I was like, you want to come see my, do you remember the window thing? Right? Like, and he's a youth pastor now, and he actually goes to Camp Collide with us, and every year, like, we kind of go to camp, and like, our awkward tension, he'll be with his volunteers, and if he brings new ones, he goes, "Hey, this is my buddy Lane, like, we've known each other since, like, first grade, you should ask him about the window," and then he'll just walk off. And now I've got to explain, and like, now as a youth pastor, I find like this Christ-likeness to explain the window situation, and there's just no good way to do it. And so there's just there. But there's this huge fight. Right, here what we see is that for me and you, we get frustrated with one another, right? And actually, the people that are closest with us, we're going to get the most frustrated with. Like, the people that you live in close proximity with, or the people that you would consider your best friend or your family, they're kind of the easiest to get into fights with and to go toe-to-toe with because you feel like they're the ones who should be the least likely to let you down. Like, that's why you've let them get close to you, or that because they understand you, or that's because what your family, or, oh man, family never does this to family. But the problem is that more often than not, we actually find ourselves in these fights, we find ourselves in these frustrations, and culture tells us that we should have like a list, an acceptable list, right? So if so-and-so can ascribe to this list and not let you down in any of these ways, then they get to stay around. But should they do any of these things, then it's time to cut them out of your life. Right? Like, they're dead weight. Trim the fat. Get out of there. Like, you don't need that. And so whenever a fight comes, you're going to be able to go to that person, right? This is something that Haley and I talked about, like, early on in dating, is that when we fight, who do we go to? Like, if I just go to someone who's on my team, then I'm going to sound really good, and they're going to be like, yeah, man, like she's the worst, that wife. Ugh. But if I go to someone who's for us, then it's a different conversation. And in the midst of friendship, we can do the same thing. We can go to someone who's going to be like, oh, yeah, man, like you're so special, and they'll sit there and they'll stroke your ego, and they'll tell you how great you are and how you're a good friend, and you do all these things. I can't believe that person did that to you. You don't need them around anymore. You need more people like me. And so we kind of get in this pattern of cutting people off and moving people out of our lives, and then we enter into our sophomore year, and we're not with the same people that we were freshman year, and not because of normal reasons, like, oh, we just kind of joined a new team, we did a different club. It's because, well, so-and-so did this last year, and I just got rid of them. And that like feels right. That feels normal. That feels like kind of what we should do. Like that kind of makes sense when we begin to talk about it and handle in those things. But if the gospel is what it is, if the gospel speaks to what we think it speaks to, then it's going to give us a different way to live within our relationships. And so in Luke chapter 15, we come into this moment, and Jesus is telling these stories about what the kingdom of heaven looks like. And he kind of tells these stories of different lost things, and he enters into verse 11. He's going to tell the story of the lost son or the prodigal son if you grew up in church. And we see the story of this relationship between this father and this son, and what the son does and how he treats the father and how the father responds to him. And primarily, when we look into the story, we go, oh man, like this is how God cares about you. And it draws us kind of closer to God, and we go, oh man, like that's a beautiful thing. But the problem is as the people of God, anytime that we see this is who God is to us, the natural next step should be, so this is how we should be to each other. We don't always make that step, but that is how we're supposed to move through Christianity. And so in Luke 15, we walk into this story, and it says, a man, he had 2 sons. The younger of them said to his father, Father, give me the share of the estate I have coming to me. And so literally what the son does is he goes to his father, basically, and he says, hey, you're dead to me, so let's go ahead and pretend like you actually are dead. Go ahead and give me everything that I would have if you were dead, which is a very comfortable dinner time conversation with your father right before you catch your favorite show on television, right? Like, hey, I wish you were 6 feet in the ground. Go ahead and give me that cash. Right? Like that's pretty much like the utmost betrayal that you can have in the midst of family. It says, hey, Dad, man, thank you so much for raising me. If I could kill you and get away with it and take your money, I would. But let's spare ourselves the awkwardness of that, and you just go ahead and give me the money that you would give me if you were dead. Like, that's not going to go over well. But the father gives it to him. And so he distributes the assets to them, and says, not many days later, the younger son gathered together all he had and traveled to a distant country where he squandered his estate in foolish living. At the end of this chapter, you see he spent it on prostitutes. After he had spent everything, a severe famine struck that country, meaning there's nothing to eat. And then he went to work for one of the citizens of that country, who sent him into his fields to feed pigs. And he longed to eat his fill from the pods that the pigs were eating, but no one would give him anything. So he's at the bottom of like he's hanging out with pigs, eating with pigs, like those are his bros, and he still can't find enough to eat from the garbage. When he came to his senses, as people usually do when they're eating with pigs, he said, how many of my father's hired workers have more than enough food, and here I am dying of hunger? I'll get up, go to my father, and say to him, Father, I have sinned against heaven and in your sight. I'm no longer worthy to be called your son. Make me like one of your hired workers. We'll continue to chapter 20 here in a sec. Here's the deal. It's interesting. I remember being in high school. I was thinking about this week, and you might be the same way. Like, I remember having friends who did things in their house that meant that they got kicked out. Especially when they were 18, like if it was in their senior year, and they could go to such depths or whatever, and their parents would kick them out of their house. And oftentimes there was a list of things that they had to accomplish or take part in or to go do in order to earn their way back into the house. And so we actually kind of have a familiar moment here where we have someone, he didn't get kicked out. He chose to leave on his own, taking all of the wealth that is due him from his father, goes out, spends it, how we say, I don't know, irresponsibly, comes back, going, oh my goodness, I've messed up. And the casual reader goes, yeah, we know. We've been reading along. And he goes, I'm going to show up to my father's house, and I've got a grand apology waiting. Now, the natural instinct of the father in this moment should be like, luckily I had 2 of you, and since I clearly messed up with you, thank goodness for your other brother. Have a nice walk. Like that seems like a really natural tendency, or to, in the very least, just as some of my friends who got kicked out when we were in high school growing up, to be able to look at them and go, man, welcome back. You know what? You can be like one of my hired hands. You can get fed, but you're going to work here. You're going to work here. You're going to earn your weight. You want to sleep under this roof, then you're going to do some things in order to be in here. And instead, here's what we see in verse 20. So he got up and he went to his father, and while the son was still a long way off, his father saw him in the distance and was filled with compassion. And the father ran and threw his arms around his neck and kissed him. And the son said to him, even in this moment, Father, I have sinned against heaven and in your sight. I'm not worthy to even be called your son. And before the son can even request to be one of his servants, which is where the son was going in this conversation, but the father told his servants, quick, bring out the best robe and put it on him. Put a ring on his finger and sandals on his feet. Bring the fattened calf and slaughter it, and let's celebrate with this feast, because this son of mine was dead and is alive again. He was lost and is found. And so they began to celebrate. Here's what we see. The son, who has done nothing to earn the favor of the father, he's left the family, so he's not even within the familial line to be able to say, oh, I'm your son. He's no longer worthy in that moment, shows up to the father and says, I'm not worthy to be that, but if I can just work for you, then I know that I'll be better taken care of here as an employee than I will be out there. And the father doesn't even answer him. Instead, he just throws a party and says, welcome back to the family. Primarily, this teaches us about God because it shows us that when you and I regularly look at God and say, no, thanks, I've got it figured out, I can do my own thing, and then we fail within that path, that God says the kingdom of heaven is like this. When you were way off, I ran out to the road to meet you and had compassion on you. Even though you screwed up greatly, even though you looked at me and said, I wish that you were dead, even though you did those things, I met you in the road. And then I celebrated that you came back. The fact that you would even turn your head in return before you could even speak words. The fact that you even turned to me, I was filled with compassion for you, and I called you mine, and I made you mine. That's the gospel. That in the deepest depths of sin, we would be forgiven and God would invite us back in the family. But then this, that when someone else is to do the worst of the worst to us, that we would run out and meet them at the road. That the moment that they felt any sort of guilt and came with apology, that we would not sit there and go, you should be apologetic. You should be sorry. Look at what you did. Look at what you did to my life. Look at what you did to our relationship. Look at how you've hurt me. Look at how you've abandoned me. That the moment that they would apologize, that we would go, you're forgiven. My relationship with you is more important than my pride. Culture will say that your pride is of the utmost important. But the gospel says to lay your pride aside and value the relationship in the person to show them who the image of God is. And that's hard. That's difficult because some of us have been really hurt. The flip side of this is some of us have been on the side that we need to turn around and we need to go apologize. And most of us are so fearful of apologizing because we say these words, right? They'll never forgive me. And so we walk on glass, afraid to screw up in the midst of our relationship so that someone will find out of how we screwed up or any of those things because if we do, then we'll have to apologize. But if we have to apologize, then they'll never forgive us. One of the conversations that Haley and I had early on in dating, not early on in dating, it was actually pretty close to when we were going to get engaged in some of those things, as we started talking, we said, man, no spouse enters into a relationship. It's like, man, I want to marry you, and one day I'm going to break you. Oh, I'm going to break you. No one does that. Yet, it happens. It happens. And so we talked, and I said, man, I want you and I to begin to think, whatever it is that we can imagine is the worst thing that we could do to each other, that right now we go, man, I could never forgive that. Let's start now preparing our hearts for what forgiveness will look like. Because whatever it is, whatever that thing is, and whatever that thing has been for other people, they didn't plan that. They walked away from Jesus, they fell into sin, they screwed up, they did terrible things, and they broke each other. And then they weren't ready for forgiveness. So let us prepare ourselves for forgiveness so that way when the day comes, when you break me and I break you, we can meet each other in the road. That when everyone else says, it doesn't matter anymore, the other person is too far gone, that you and I, we don't say that. Because the gospel would never say that to us. Because God would never say that to us. So why would we say it to each other when we're just two screwed up people trying to figure this thing out? Let us be someone who fights for the other person. In the midst of our friendships, let us be people who fight for our friends. That we don't withhold forgiveness. If the image of Christians for other people is that we are a people that withhold forgiveness because someone cannot reach our standard, then we may not know Jesus. Like, let that stick with you. I don't care what prayer you prayed. I don't care what altar you walked. If you are a person that is identified by being a withholder of forgiveness, then you don't understand the gospel. Like, you don't understand Jesus. Because he's not a withholder of forgiveness, nor should his people be. More than this, man, we can celebrate a relationship with God because he is not a withholder of forgiveness. Because I am so prone to run away. Like, I am prone to sin. My first inclination is to sin. But God meets me in the road. Same roommate. No, different roommate, same house. My buddy Austin was one that, when I went to college, I had a lot of friends from high school that went to A&M. Because I grew up in like suburban town, everyone's conservative, and so everybody's like, well, A&M's the place to be. It's basically the conservative suburbs on campus. And so a lot of us ended up there. But when I got to school, my whole life, I thought I was going to go to school out of state. And so I was like, man, I'm going to go to A&M, but I'm not going to hang out with the same people that I hung out with for 4 years. Like, I'm not doing high school over again. I refuse. And then I kind of a little bit did high school over again. But in that, I met a dude my freshman year. We were in kind of the same organization, and so that was founded on Christ, and so we were both Christians, and we would hang out. I mean, we would like go eat lunch at least once a week together. I'd always invite him, like when I was going to go live in high school land, I was like, hey, you should come too, so I don't like totally feel like I'm living in high school land. And he would come along, and I mean, he was a guy that we used to go to his house like on Christmas break and stuff like that because he lived in this awesome ranch, and we could drive four-wheelers and do all the things that I never got to do when I was a kid because I lived in suburbia. And I was like, oh man, the place is awesome. His mom used to make like just buckets of fried chicken, and she would send them in like giant baggies back to our house, and we would literally just eat fried chicken for like months. We'd just come back to the fridge and be like, heat it up. This is delicious. We're putting on like 50 pounds each. This is phenomenal. And one day I come home, and I'm a much cleaner husband than I was a college student. I love a clean house now. Like I get stoked to go home and just pick stuff up. Man, I just want a clean house. But when I was in college, I was like, I don't own this place. Let's burn it down. Okay, so I just kind of lived like super messy all the time. Like I never did dishes because I was always going. And I was like, well, if I stop to do chores, then I can't hang out with people. And so like the dishes would just compile and build like their own city, and people would move in and they would make a mess themselves, and it was just disgusting. And so one day I come home and there's a sign on my door, and it's like typed up, really pretty. It went through his printer. He had his own personal printer. I've never had a personal printer in my life. I'm not a very good adult. And on it says, do the dishes, in a few other words. And so I see it, and I immediately think, and I go, this is so interesting. Like, this is fascinating, because this dude has never mowed the lawn, vacuumed the carpet, cleaned the bathroom, or ever walked out of his room. How does he even know there's dishes in the house? I'm not sure. And so me, in this great moment that I was like, oh man, you're going to ministry, you love Jesus, we're going to take this down, and we're going to forgive him. No, I did not. I did not win that, well, my flesh won that battle. Jesus did not win that battle that day. Okay, I grab it, and I go and find a Sharpie in my room. It's a nice 8.5 by 11, and I'm like, how many words can I fit on this paper? And so I cross out his, where it says, do the dishes, and it says, and I cross out dishes, and then I list, because we love lists. There's nothing more that a college boy loves than to look at a list of things he has not done, which is not true. And so I list, mow the lawn, vacuum the carpet. Literally do anything with your life. Leave your room and tell your girlfriend to go home. Like, I was just like, all of it. And then I grabbed it, and I took it to his room, and I got a hammer and a nail because thumbtacks and doors are hard. I put it on his door, I stuck the nail there, and whap! And then I ran really, really fast out the door, to my car, to my date with my now beautiful wife, only for my phone to vibrate the entire date with a lot more words. And I run out the door. And we have now started war in our house. It's March. And sometimes I exaggerate things. Haley can attest. I did not exaggerate this one. We never spoke again. I walked out of the house. I lived with him for 2 more months and never said another word. We moved out at the end of the semester. I moved into a new house. I've never seen him again. I have no idea what he's doing. I know who he's married to because it was the same girl that he was dating for the time they've been dating since high school. No idea where he lives. No idea what he does. I'm sure he has no clue anything about me. Because pride won. There was a dude that had you have asked me in my sophomore year of college, who will be in your wedding one day? I'm pretty sure I probably would have said him. That dude didn't even get an invite. I didn't get invited to his. I don't think that's what the kingdom of God looks like. It would have been really easy for one of us to have just walked in and gone, hey man, that got out of hand. But we didn't. No confidence the other person would forgive us, no confidence in ourselves to be able to apologize. And we just buried the relationship as far down under the ground. And it's done. Is that what you want? Like, do you want to invest so much into somebody, let somebody in, let them walk into the door of friendship, let them be a part of a relationship, share memories together, think that you're going to be there at all the great moments in life, and then let one thing ruin it all, no matter how big a thing or how little a thing? No matter what you said, no matter what you did. Like, do you want to let that be the defining marker of your relationships? Or do you want forgiveness, that you are willing to give it and to ask for it at all times? Do you want that to be the defining marker of your relationships? Because that is the kingdom of God. That is the gospel. As you go into small groups tonight, you'll talk about those relationships. How you let them live, how you let them die. And I'm hoping that you get this idea of who God is, that you get this understanding of your salvation. If you've given your life to Jesus, that he met you in the road. You didn't earn it. Man, you were out there living in sin. But he had compassion and he forgave you anyway. And that if you haven't given your life to Jesus, that's what it means to give your life to Jesus, that he puts forgiveness out there before you ever deserved it. We should jump on it. That he meets us in the road. So maybe we should meet others there too. I'm going to pray for us, and then you guys can head to small groups. If you'll hold tight when I'm done, some of you have got to move to some different people in some different groups.